Good evening. I'm Keith Sharp. I appreciate you inviting me to come and be in this series of lectures with you. I know you hear people say I'm humbled on a regular basis. Well, I'm humbled nonetheless. That you would have me to come and appear on this series. And I'm particularly thinking about Brother Jim McDonald that you had the other night. And Dick, I asked Dick if he knew how many times he'd been to the Philippines, and I think he said that somebody accumulated about 77 times he'd been over there. Well, I haven't been to Africa, and I haven't been overseas anywhere close to that. And so I appreciate men like that. Of course, Brother McDonald, I think, is 15 years older than I am, but you know, he can keep his record. I don't intend to try to break it. But I will tell you, because you've had some fellowship with me, which is very much appreciated, and I would try to communicate to you at the time my appreciation for your fellowship in the work that I've done both in East Africa and in the Samoan Islands. I want to, well, let's see, I'm clicking the wrong one. I do this on a regular basis. The wrong clicker. I did that in Mountain Home the other day, and it took me after the sermon was over to figure out what I'd done. I'm low tech. So you've helped quite a bit in the work that I have done and others have done in taking the gospel to the whole world. Of course, we're operating under the authority, under the command that was given to Jesus Christ by his apostles. Mark's record of the Great Commission says, he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. There are those who contend that that was only to the apostles. If you read Matthew's record of the Great Commission, I believe he makes it very clear if that's not the case. It says, teaching them in verse 20 to observe all things that I've commanded you. And so whatever Jesus commanded the apostles, particularly and specifically in the Great Commission, applies to all his disciples. And so this is something that, this is the way the gospel is spread from generation to generation. This is the way it goes to the whole world, is by the fulfillment of the Great Commission. There's various ways to do that. One way is to do what the Apostle Paul did, is recorded in the book of Acts, is just to go, physically to go to various places where he had never been before. And in Paul's case, where the gospel had never been before, in some cases, not always. And so that is the way, the one way the gospel is spread, and that's what Brother McDonald and others that have spoken to you this week have tried to do, and that's what I've tried to do also. Now, my approach to this has been not exactly like the Apostle Paul is in Acts chapter 16. You're familiar, of course, when Paul had the vision. In Acts chapter 16, it says, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia stood and pleaded with him, saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. Now, after he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that the Lord had called us to preach the gospel to them. I never had a vision. The Lord never directly and miraculously called me to preach the gospel. And if I thought that was the case, I'm sure you would not be having me here, and you'd be right in doing that. I might be in a Pentecostal church, but I wouldn't be here. And you would be right, and they would be wrong. So that didn't happen to me. But my whole history of doing overseas preaching has been because somebody asked me to go there, either somebody that was there or somebody who was going there, but in some way I was asked to go, and I decided with my wife's permission, I'll say more about that shortly, I decided with Sandy's permission that I would go and do that, and as the result, it's been a very rewarding, very important part of my life, my work as a preacher of the gospel. Now, you asked me to speak concerning East Africa. I've made 14 trips to Africa beginning in 1992. And I'll say more about that in just a moment, which Brother Lowell Blasingame took me and two other preachers in addition to us with him to Nigeria. It was his seventh and last trip to Nigeria at a time when it was a lot more difficult making the overseas trips than it is now. And some of the trips that Brother Blasingame made while, at the time that I went with him, he was preaching full time in Pine Bluff at the 6th Street congregation in Pine Bluff. And he took, now not with me, but earlier he would take as much as 6 weeks to go to Nigeria and do what was very difficult and dangerous work. I've learned, well, from the very outset, Brother Lowell Blasingame has been a hero of mine. He was my mentor in doing the African work. And the work that I've done in Africa, I've tried to repeat the work that I did with Brother Blasingame, and I've never been able to be as successful in doing that work as we were on that first trip to Nigeria in January of 1992. And I still have some of the best memories of my life in that hot, dirty, sweaty, dangerous climate in Nigeria with Brother Lowell Blasingame and cracking up at his jokes as he lightened the time as we were working together in that very dangerous place. But that was the first of my 14 trips to Africa. In addition to that, and I'll mention in order, I made one trip in 1995, but that was both to South Africa and Zimbabwe. I made that trip because Brother Johnny Scholes, who is a native, and he's my age, and he's a native of South Africa, and I met him in Florida, and he asked me to come and work with him, and I agreed to do that. And so my poor wife and I, she's been one of the most long-suffering women in human history. The poor wife of mine, we went together to begin a work in northern New York in July, the last of July of 1995. And as soon as we got there and moved into our house, I went off and left her. And stayed for a month in South Africa and Zimbabwe, working with Brother Johnny Scholes and Brother Newman Gumpo and others there in South Africa. And then I was also invited to go to Uganda. The Uganda, I'll have to point up here. Here's, let's see, can they? Well, that's not pointing, so I won't try that. Uganda's over in East Africa, on the north shore of Lake Victoria, Winston Churchill called Uganda the jewel of Africa. Physically, it's a beautiful country, stunningly beautiful. Like all African countries, they have all kinds of problems. But I was asked by a friend of mine named Dennis Barron, who lives in Fort Myers, Florida, and we got to know each other in northern New York. And they were supporting a preacher over there in Uganda, and he'd fallen off the face of the earth. And he knew that I went to Africa. And he wanted to know if I would go over and check on their preacher. Well, I did, and I did not have good news for them, but that was the first of 6 trips that I made to Uganda. And that was some very rewarding trips. And then in 2012, Brother Dennis Caro in Little Rock got in touch with me, and he said that he had been invited to go to Kenya, which is just south and east of Uganda. They border each other. They're part of the East African Confederation, and both of them border on Lake Victoria, the second largest lake in the world. And he said that he had been invited by a man named Bernard Kagaga, who preached in Kalamindi and taught classes for preachers, to come and teach classes for preachers. And he'd never been to Africa. I don't think Dennis had ever been overseas. I'm not sure about that. And he wanted to know if I would go with him. Well, I was going to be in Uganda anyway. So Sandy was with me on that trip, and we drove along with an African couple as far as north-south to Kalamindi, Kenya, and spent 2 weeks there teaching in that school for preachers. And so that was the first of 4 trips that I made to Kenya, and I'll tell you more about that later. And then, for 12 years, there was a man named Timothy Masawe, who is in Moshi, Tanzania. Now, Tanzania is the next country south of Kenya. Again, that's one of the 3 countries that make the East African Confederation. And for 12 years, he had been after me to come and visit him in Tanzania. And I knew it would be a long drive from Kenya or Uganda. I really didn't want to make the drive, but last summer, 2019, I made my last trip. And because I'm an elder of the church at Mountain Home, and there's only 2 elders, then I decided, and I told the congregation, this would be my last trip to Africa. And so I knew I was going for the last time, and so I agreed to go down and to meet Brother Timothy Masawe. I didn't know what I was getting into. I had in my mind For some reason, I'd conjured this in my mind, that he was an old liberal preacher with a liberal preaching school. He just wanted an American to come work with him, and so try to get some American money. Now, that's forgive me. That was the idea. I could not have been more wrong if I'd tried. And so it turned out to be a wonderful situation. So I've made one trip to Tanzania on my last trip to Africa. Now, let's back up a little bit and talk about each of these in order. My first of my 4 trips to Africa was to Nigeria, and then there's a 14-year period between my first trip there and the second trip. Nigeria has always been a violent place, and they went through a revolution after Brother Blasingame took me there in 1992. And the American State Department told Brother Blasingame and me not to go back. And so there was a 14-year hiatus in which I didn't go back. And Brother Blasingame got too old to go back, and so he was never able to return after his 7th trip. But then in 2006, I started going over there again, and I went 3 times, 2006, 2007, and 2009. But then it got so dangerous again, all kinds of violence and danger over there. It's a very, very violent country for various reasons. That I have not tried to return for the last 11 years. I have some wonderful friends. I miss them. In fact, I'll show you, well, I may not have his picture because I'm trying to concentrate on East Africa. But there's a young man over there that I consider to be my son. And he's just very, very near and dear to me. And I miss the Nigerians, but that's something that we'll have to greet each other in heaven. But this is a picture 2 pictures that we took on my first trip to Africa in 1992. Now, I told you I went with Lowell Blasingame, and I said that I always went because somebody asked me to go. In 1991, the fall of 1991, Sandy and I lived in Lakeland, Florida, and I was preaching in Central Florida. And I got a letter from Brother Lowell Blasingame, whom I'd known for some time, was very dear to me. Tremendous respect I have for him. In fact, he's a hero to me and a mentor of mine. And he asked me to go with him to Nigeria in January of 1992. And here's what I did. For any of you young men that are interested in doing any work like this, I believe this is the right, I got it right this time. I went to Sandy and I showed her the letter from Brother Blasingame. And she read the letter. And she said, "You want to go, don't you?" I get teary-eyed thinking about this. And I said, "I want to go so bad I can taste it." I believe that's a word-for-word quote in both cases. She said, "Well, then go." Do you understand that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul said, "You men, you cannot be separated from your wife except by their permission. And you wives cannot be separated from your husband except by his permission." I believe that passage. I could not make these trips if I did not have a wife who has supported the work that I do, even though it made it especially difficult on her. Young men, marry that kind of a woman. That's what you need in order to do the Lord's work. So I went with Brother Lowell Blasingame. I'll mention one other thing, and I'm getting too emotional about this. Please forgive me. Brother Lowell Blasingame died several years ago, and his funeral was down in Birmingham. And I was one of the 4 speakers at his funeral. And when I got through just telling a few stories about Brother Blasingame and me and my memories of him, then I turned to the casket and I said, "Goodbye, my old friend, my old fellow laborer, my fearless leader, and my mentor. I'll see you in the morning." And I'm still looking forward to that great morning when I'll meet that wonderful man again. He was my mentor, and I loved him. I love him, and he's taught me how to do the work in Africa. And I've tried to do it the way he did it. Now, I think he learned it from Brother Billy Moore, and we've tried to do it that way. And I won't go into detail. If you younger men, if you're interested in doing this kind of work anytime, you can get in touch with me. Dick knows how to do that. And I'll tell you the way that I've tried to do it, the way Brother Blasingame did the foreign work. The picture that you see there in black and white is Brother Blasingame and me in the city of Enugu. And in between us is Brother Benjamin Shemezri. Brother Blasingame called him the Lion of Owerri. He was a fearless preacher of the gospel, fearless defender of the truth against liberalism. Shortly after we were there, Brother Benjamin Shemezri died. And Brother Blasingame said he just laid his head on his desk and just cried like a baby. And I understand that. And then on the right is Brother Blasingame and me, again in the city of Enugu. And we're there with Brother Benson Omucharuba. You'll get a test on these names. Brother Benson Omucharuba is still alive and still doing the Lord's work. And now his son, Christian Omucharuba, is doing the Lord's work there also. And we've had some help to him over there in that area, which is south central Nigeria. Well, that was one of 4 trips to Nigeria. But and by the way, here's what we primarily did. Now, this was taken 2008, I think, in the city of, my mind just went, Uyo, in Akwa Ibom State in southeastern Nigeria. And I wish I could point out to these, but up to my left, as you're looking at this, up the tall young man is Emmanuel J. Ebong, Manny Ebong. And he's the one who's like a son to me. We stay in constant touch, and we talk to each other on Zoom now just about every week. He now preaches in Lagos and also works in London, UK. Can you pick out me in that picture? Can you see me? You might find me there? Okay, well, I thought maybe you could. Just below me and to my right is Brother Udo. We were going to work together in Nigeria. He was killed in a motorcycle wreck shortly after I was there that year and left a wife and 5 young children behind. So that's the kind of thing that goes on in Nigeria. That's the kind of thing that goes on in Africa. But we taught classes for preachers, multiplied ourselves. That Uyo Town Church of Christ is one of the first churches of Christ started in the nation of Nigeria. The gospel came to Nigeria in 1948. By an American Bible correspondence course. But at any rate, when I was there in 1992, that congregation had 600 members. It has its own elders, helps preachers in other places. I asked Manny just a few days ago, and that's Manny's home congregation where he grew up. His father, Brother E.J. Ebong, was the preacher there for many years and had a school for preachers. That was a work of the local church. It was not a separate organization. That congregation now has about 1,100 members, and it still stands for the truth. Now, that's how the gospel is done in Nigeria. There's probably, in that part of Nigeria, more Christians per capita than any other place in the world, including North Alabama. But that is, the Nigerians are especially receptive to the gospel. I would love to return, but I don't believe it will happen in this life. This is preaching at nighttime. In Benin City, Brother David Karamay is translating for me up there in the congregation, the Sapele Road Church of Christ, Benin City. Brother Karamay is now dead. It seems like I know a lot of people that are now dead. But he was a good man, stood for the truth there. He was the only man in that city that was standing for the truth against institutionalism. But I've talked to some young man from there, and there's now some people that are standing for the truth there in Benin City, which is an important city in south central Nigeria. Okay, I made 6 trips to Uganda because I was invited to go there by the brethren in Fort Myers, Florida. Did a lot of work all across South Uganda, all the way from the east, which is the border with Kenya, to the west, which is the border with Congo. But all of the work was done in the south. In the north is primarily Muslim. I primarily work with Brother Francis Oketch, and you can ask me about that later on. I'm not going to say any more about that. But I'm going to show a picture to, this is East Africa. I'll show a picture or two of East Africa. I don't know if you can see this, know how clear it is. But if you can see in the center of the picture towards the back, there's a white spot. That is actually a glacier on top of a mountain that is almost 17,000 feet high. That's the Rwenzori Mountains. and that's Margarita Peak, which is the third highest mountain in Africa. I started to say Arkansas, third highest mountain in Africa. And on two of our trips, we were invited to go over and work with congregations in the foothills of the Rwenzori Peaks. And I took my daughter Michelle with me one time, and we got to go to a place where they said that no white preacher had ever gone before. And I'll show you that picture in just a moment. And there were already existing churches there. I'm not sure whether they're opposed to institutionalism. I don't know if they know what institutionalism is. But I preach the truth. I talked about the authority of the Scriptures and how to establish the authority of the Scriptures and have to have authority for what we do. And they agree with all of that, and I've stayed in contact with them, and others have also. They don't have any money to support any human institutions, so I don't have to worry about that going on. And so far as orphanages, this is how it's practiced in most of Africa. If children are left orphans, a Christian takes them into their home and provides for them. And I know of preachers in Africa who have taken in as many as 12 children and cared for them in their homes. I don't know where they must have got that from the Bible, you reckon? They certainly didn't get it from American brethren, did they? And so we don't have to worry about issues like that over in East Africa. They're not fighting over the use of money. They have no money to fight over. But at any rate, we went up into the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains, and there at the foot of Margarita Peak, and that's on the border with Congo. While I was there working with Brother Francis Oketch, we were working primarily along the shores of Lake Victoria. This is in Jinja, which is a tourist city. It's the source of the Nile River. You know, white men for years and years were looking for the source of the Nile River. And Ugandans knew all along where the Nile River started. They just knew it was the Nile River. This is the city of Jinja is where the Nile River, and you can see the exact spot. I have a photograph of the exact spot where the lake ends and the river begins. Lake Victoria ends and the Nile River begins, and it's a big river where it starts, because Lake Victoria is the second largest lake in the world. And there's the Lakeside Church of Christ with about 300 present that Sunday morning as I was preaching there, and Francis Oketch translating for me in Jinja. And then I believe this was in 2008, maybe in 2010, that a brother went with me from Paducah, Kentucky, and we went to Uganda and worked there. And we went also over to Tororo, which is on the border with Ron Griffin met me, or we went together and worked in Uganda. And this is the Tororo Church of Christ on the border with Kenya, with about 150 people present. The most heartbreaking work that I did, and probably the most heartbreaking work that I've done in Africa, is in the Masesi slum, which is right next to Jinja. And the Ugandan government forcibly resettled a tribe from northern Uganda onto the shores of Lake Victoria in South Uganda, made them leave northern Uganda because they were thieves, and go down there and live, and they had no way to make a living. And so the women have turned to prostitution, the men have turned to stealing and gambling. Most of them are HIV positive. Many of them have tuberculosis. And we went and worked among them. And Brother Francis Oketch and his sister Rosemary Othieno converted a lot of people there in that slum of Masesi. And we worked there always when we went there. This is back over I don't have these in order as far as where they are. This is back over in western Uganda along the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains. And this is the Maliba Church of Christ. And my daughter was with me there. I believe this was 2015, if I remember correctly. And we went up to a place called Kitoko. And this is the road to Kitoko. And yes, that is a drop-off on the edge of that. And we were some places driving right next to that very steep and deep drop-off going up toward the Rwenzori Mountains. And we came, by the way, the last several hundred yards was just grass before we got to the village of Kitoko, there at the top of the foothills before you get the Rwenzori Mountains, on the border with Congo. And there, a large audience of people met us, and we taught for 2 days there in Kitoko. My daughter, Michelle, taught women. I taught the men. Then we would have all come together in the afternoon, and I would answer their questions. And we did a lot of good, I believe, and there working with a man named Brother Tom, who is the preacher there in Kitoko, and they said that no white preacher had ever been to Kitoko before. They were too far back in the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains for people to go there. We started going to Kenya. I told you how I started going to Kenya as the result of the invitation from Brother Dennis Carroll to meet him there in Kalamindi to work with Brother Bernard Kagaga. Well, as it turned out, and this was in 2012, Brother Kagaga was under the influence of American institutional brethren and their money, and he knew the truth. And I taught the truth on the institutional issues while I was there. They asked me to teach a course that they would use for preacher training, and they would give them credit for preacher training for me to teach a course on the church Jesus built. And that's what I taught while I was there. And that covered the fact, of course, that we have local congregations. These local congregations are limited in the work that we can do, and these local congregations are independent, autonomous. They don't get together so far as being controlled by somebody above them. Each congregation does its own separate work from every other congregation. I don't think I have to tell you, brethren, the details of that. Well, I taught that. Well, Brother Kagaga decided to turn against Brother Carroll and me, and he called me every name there was after I left there. He never did that to my face. But there were 4 preachers. Now, Brother Henry Ogutu, that you're going to see in a moment, was already standing for the truth before I went there. I'll tell you about him in just a moment. But 4 preachers from that preacher's training class took a stand for the truth on the institutional issues as the result of that visit. And by the way, my wife Sandy was there with us teaching classes for the women, and that was in 2012. And as the result of that, 4 preachers, even though they were blackballed by the other preachers in the churches there, even though their opportunity to get American money from big liberal churches was lost, they took a stand for the truth of the institutional issues, and they still are standing for the truth on those institutional issues. Now, in my trip since then, I have used Brother Henry Ogutu as my driver, my translator, and my guide, and my trusted friend. Brother Henry Ogutu already stood for the truth. He lives in Bungoma, Kenya, in southwest Kenya, along with his wife Pamela and their 3 children. And he was baptized and taught and trained to preach by Brother Alan Turner, who lived over there for 3 years, I believe, in Kenya. And he put Brother Turner on a pedestal the same way I put Brother Lowell Blasingame on a pedestal. And so when I went over there, he was in my classes because he heard we were coming. He was no part of that preacher training school at Kalamindi. But he and I remained in touch, and he's been my guide and translator and trusted friend ever since then in East Africa. And so this is Brother Henry translating for me while I'm preaching. Actually, I was teaching a Bible class here in one of the churches close to Bungoma in the 3 trips that I made over there subsequently. Now, in 2015, when I was over there with my daughter, Michelle, and she was teaching classes for women while I was teaching classes for the preachers, and then I would preach. Then one of the places we visited was Kiorori, which is out in the bush away from a city called Kisii. It's in southwestern Kenya. And the preacher there was Brother Simon Sagwe, and he and his wife Florence have 6 children. And at that time, the little church was meeting on their land behind their house, meeting under what here we would call a brush arbor. Now, you folks my age may remember the time of brush arbors. And I've worshiped in a brush arbor here and in Texas both. And if you missed that, you missed a real treat. But at any rate, this is what they were meeting. It'd be like a brush arbor they were meeting in. And whenever there came a big storm, which comes regularly, they're in equatorial East Africa. When it storms, it really storms. And then it would blow down their meeting house, and they'd have to rebuild it afterwards. Well, then last year, I made my third trip there to Kiorori and visited this church again, the congregation in Kiorori, where Brother Simon Sagway is. And this is the church building they're now meeting in. And that's just in 4 years, the congregation has grown incredibly. And they now have 2 elders. Brother Simon Sagway is one of the 2 elders. His brother is the other elder. They have a regular song leader. Brother Simon is their preacher. And there were 4 of us who went there in 2019, my last trip to Africa, and taught classes there at Kiorori, just outside the city of Kisii. We had women's classes, and my daughter Michelle and her friend Pam Lawrence, who is the wife of an elder at the Prince Street Church of Christ in Conway, Brother Brooks Lawrence, and he's a medical doctor there in Conway and an elder at Prince Street. And Pam and Michelle have been friends for many years. I preached in Conway years ago. And so they taught classes for the women. And I didn't arrange this. This is how the brethren in Africa set it up, and this is typical Africa. The women got to meet outside under shade trees. And the preachers met inside the church building. Now, I might or might not have arranged it that way, but I will tell you this. I do like to have my bald head sheltered from the sun. And so I probably would have set it up the same way. But nonetheless, the women were meeting outside, and you might be able to see a milk cow in the background there as in the classes that they were teaching. And in the meantime, we had about 20 preachers. And so this is the growth that's taking place. They wanted to bring everybody in from various congregations around. But we were having to pay to feed those folks that came in from miles around and stayed there. And I said, Simon, we can't afford to feed all those folks. Just invite the preachers and their wives. And that's what they did. And so we had about 20 preachers that came together. And these preachers were taught the truth again by Brother Don McLean, who preaches in Little Rock. And we were working together there. And had various translators, including Henry Ogutu. And so and you've helped in this work in East Africa. And so there's been a great deal of progress made in southwestern Kenya. So far as I know, now I can't prove this either way, so far as I know, before 2012, the only preacher in southwestern Kenya who was standing for the truth against institutionalism was Brother Henry Ogutu, and he was trained by Brother Alan Turner. Now I know that there are at least 5 preachers, and probably many more there that I don't personally know, because we had about 20 preachers in our classes a year ago in the summer of 2019 that went through those classes taught by Brother Don McLean and me. Now I told you that a man named Timothy Masawe had been after me for 12 years. Let me give you the background to this. When Sandy and I lived and worked in northern New York, 30 miles south of Canada, for 14 years. And we left there and moved to Mountain Home in November of 2009. And while we were still in New York, there was a fella from Tanzania who requested off of our Bible, off of our website. We have a website called ChristIsTheWay.com, and we offer a free Bible correspondence course that we'll mail to anywhere in the world. And this fellow requested our Bible correspondence course. His name was Timothy Masawe. And I guess I remember that because he's from Tanzania, and I had to look up and see where Tanzania is. And he never completed the first lesson of the Bible correspondence course. But we also put a paper that I send out free of charge by email that's called Meditate on These Things. We send that out to anybody that requests our Bible correspondence course. Now, if they ask to be taken off, we don't ask any questions. We take the name off of it. But that's going out now to almost 3,500 email addresses, and teaching various men write in it. And he started getting that, and I didn't even know that. I didn't even realize he was on the mail list. But he began contacting me from Tanzania. I had no idea who this man was. And this is the man that I had envisioned in my mind. This is some liberal preacher like Bernard Kagaga, who has a big preacher school getting money from the liberals, And he wants me to come over there as a white man so he can have another source of money. Now, this is what I had in my mind. Shame on me. But he kept after me for 12 years to come and visit Tanzania. And I knew that last summer a year ago, was the last time I was going to Africa. So I agreed. And Henry Ogutu, it took a 2-day drive from southwestern Kenya to get to where we went in northern Tanzania. And I wish I could show you a picture of the mountain we were at the base of there. The mountain that we were at the base of there is the tallest mountain in Africa. And guess how many times we were spent 4 days at the base of the tallest mountain in Africa, and I never saw it because it was covered with fog the whole time I was there. But at any rate, I've been at the base of the tallest mountain in Africa, even though I've never seen it. But at any rate, we went to Moshi, Tanzania, and there we were met and stayed in the home of Timothy and Agnes Masawe. And I want you to know, 4 days is all it took for me to fall in love with them. He's not even a preacher. He's a lawyer. He makes good money on his own. He's one of the leading lawyers there in the city of Moshi, which is a city of about 500,000 people in northern Tanzania, at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. And he just wanted me to come over there and preach the truth, because he had learned through reading, meditate on these things, that the local church is autonomous. And he wanted me, I told him, he wanted me to preach on church autonomy, and I did so. But I said, Timothy, I'm not going to use the word autonomy, because that's an English word that even English-speaking people have trouble with. And English is actually a third language to people from Tanzania. They grow up speaking their tribal tongue. Then they learn to speak Swahili when they start to school. And then if they go to high school, they learn English. And it's an Africanized English that they learn from the British. And so I'm going to go over there with Southern American English, and I'm going to speak to them, and they're going to have to understand what I'm saying or have somebody translate it for them. And so I said, I'm not going to use the word autonomy. I'm going to use the word local, or the phrase local control. And he said, no, Brother Sharp, please use the word autonomy. There is a Swahili word which means exactly the same thing as autonomy: self-government, self-rule. And I said, Timothy, I will use the word autonomy, because that's the exact meaning of the word autonomy. Each congregation under Jesus Christ is ruled entirely from within. Self-rule, autonomy, self-government. Nobody on this earth outside this local church has the right to have any control whatsoever over the work of this local church. And that's what Timothy Masawe wanted me to preach in Moshi, Tanzania. He had gone to a preacher training school run by the liberals. They were controlled by Americans. They were controlled by American money. They've started an organization, TZ 2000, I think, Tanzania 2000, which it's a missionary society that controls all the churches of Tanzania. And he wanted them to break free from that. And before I even got there, Timothy Masawe had convinced Brother Wilson Matei, who was a teacher in the liberal preacher training school in Moshi, of the truth of local autonomy. And the two of them and others had left that liberal church, those liberal brethren, and started a congregation composed of people who believe in each local church is separate and autonomous, no outside control. Keep your American money, we'll just control our own affairs. And that's the way, and by the way, that's the way they did it before I ever got, now I added some words to it, but they'd already established that before Don McLean and I ever got there. And now, Brother Timothy Masawe has convinced another congregation south of there where his brother preaches to leave those liberals, leave those preacher training schools, and just have local church autonomy. So that is what's going on in Tanzania. By the way, when I got home, I sent out a report on these things, and the church in Richmond, Missouri, is now is supporting Brother Wilson Matei in his work there. And I don't have Wilson's picture on here, and I can't show you all these people because I don't know how to point up here, but you can see on, the next picture. Wrong clicker again. That is the Kilimanjaro Church of Christ in Moshi, Tanzania. Don McLean is standing in the front. Now, I think you can pick him out. I'm on the far side, Michelle, my daughter, next to me, and Pam Lawrence next to her. And up at the very back is Brother Timothy Masawe. And I don't think I can point out to you, and I can't point it out anyway. I've got to go quickly. I'm running out of time. All right. I'm going to go way back in time, but I'm going to go quickly now. I'm trying to find a clock somewhere to tell me how badly overtime I am. I'll go quickly, brethren. I'm going to back up, except I'm going to go forward one. The man there is Most Honorable Sua Alexander Eli Jennings. He is a high chief in Samoa, and he's on the American Samoan legislature. And that's his wife, Rowena, or Winna as we call her. Back in the early 70s, I was preaching in Baytown, Texas. Had the honor of baptizing a lady by the name of Bessie Thomas. And eventually several of her children were baptized. One of those children was Alex Jennings, my former husband. He, when we moved from Baytown, Texas to Conway, Arkansas in 1977, wanted to go live with us instead of to be a preacher. So his junior and senior years of high school, he lived with us in Conway. And he became a Conway Wampus cat, just as I was, and graduated from Conway High School. And then the story, I won't go from there. But I made Alex a promise. If you will go back to Samoa and start a congregation, I'll come help you. Well, what year was it? It was 2006. Alex and his wife Rowena finally moved to American Samoa as he became the head of the family and a high chief, the head of the extended family and a high chief, and they own an island. And he got in touch with me and said, Keith, you can come. So I've made 6 trips to the Samoan Islands. I wish I had more time to tell you about this. This has been one of the great... By the way, where's Samoa? Anybody know where Samoa is? There it is. Alex used to tell people in Conway, if they ask him, where is Samoa? He said, go to Honolulu and hang a left. It's a long left. From Los Angeles to Honolulu is 2,500 miles. Turn south at Honolulu and go another 2,500 miles. And you come to the Samoan Islands, a speck into the middle of the South Pacific. And that's where Alex is from. And that's where I've been 6 times. Now, the Samoan Islands are divided between Samoa, the nation of Samoa, and American Samoa. Don't have time to tell you about that. The international date line goes between them. And so it's one day in American Samoa. It's a day earlier. It's another day. It's a day earlier in the nation of Samoa. That's where the days change on the international date line. So Alex, when he can afford to, can worship with the brethren. I have to get this straight in my mind. One day in Leone, American Samoa, make the 40-mile flight across. It's the other way around, Sandy says. All right, she's right. It's Sunday, at any rate. He can fly back and forth between the two, and it's Sunday one day in America, in the nation of Samoa. It's Sunday the next day in American Samoa. And so he can worship with the congregations in both places, take the Lord's Supper both times, and do it scripturally and preach to both of them. And every once in a while he does. And he would do that on a regular basis, except it costs a lot of money to make that flight. And he has to stay in a hotel when he goes over there to the nation of Samoa. But we've managed to get congregations started that stand for the truth in both places. This is our first trip in 2007, I believe. Do you notice what I'm wearing? Can you see what I'm wearing? I'm not ashamed of that. That's called a lava. That's the way a Samoan man dresses. And I think the main difference between the Samoan men and the Samoan women is the Samoan men's is mid-calf, and the women's all the way down to their ankles. And so that's us in American Samoa, Leone, American Samoa, in 2007. Michelle, our daughter, Sandy, my wife, Katie, their teenage daughter, who is now married and living in Idaho and has 2 children. 3 children? Okay, Sandy, correct me, 3 children. And Rowena and Alex and I are both wearing lavas. That's the way you do it if you're going to be in Samoa. You better learn to do that if you're going to go to Samoa. Otherwise, you won't be well accepted in Samoa. And that's working in Leone, American Samoa. Now, the next year, in 2008, we went over to the nation of Samoa and worked there. And Sandy went with me. Our daughter Michelle went with us. And my 80-year-old Aunt Ruby went with us. And she was a joy. Ask me afterwards. I'll tell you about Aunt Ruby in Samoa. That was just a joy. And we got to stay in Fale. Fale means house. And this is a traditional Samoan Fale. Where's the walls? They don't have any walls. Now, there's a blue tarp on the back of it. That's to protect them from the ocean. By the way, a lot of those Fales that we were in when we were there in 2008 were destroyed by tsunami not long after we were there, and 200 Samoans were killed, including Fales that we stayed in while we were there. And so the Lord was with us on that. And Sandy and Michelle taught classes for children and women, and I taught the men and preached. And we have Alex and his wife and others started this, and I go and help them. Alex's younger brother, Mike Thomas, who now preaches in Kentucky. That's Alex's younger brother. And he's gone with me, and he's gone on his own now to the Samoan Islands. Does a great work. I love to work with Mike Thomas. Super great guy. And this is the Church of Christ in Leone, American Samoa, that stands for the truth. They've gone through a lot. I don't have time to tell you about that. And this is the little church that meets in the home of Sister Tui, who herself is a high chief, in the nation of Samoa, in Vimoso, Samoa. And so this is the 2 places that I want to go, but we would have gone back this year except for the coronavirus. One time I started to go over there and got sick and couldn't go. Thank you, brothers and sisters. That's the work that you've helped me to do. There are now people all the way from Tanzania, 9 hours east of here, and on the equator. We go back and forth across the equator when we work in Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. I've stood with both feet with 1 foot on each side of the equator while I was in those places. And my wife has done the same. And that's equatorial East Africa. That's 9 hours. It's the other side of the world. You've helped send the gospel there. And you've helped send the gospel to the Samoan Islands, south of the equator, 6 hours west of here. Thank you, brothers and sisters. You've had fellowship in that work. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send workers into his harvest. I'm old. I hope to go back to Samoa again, the Lord willing. This year wasn't able to go. but I hope to go back to Samoa. We need young people to come along and to step up. I stepped up and took over for Brother Lowell Blasingame. Very inadequate. I could never fill, those shoes are too big to fill. But I did the best that I could. It's now time for younger people, and not just men. We need women to go with their husbands and to teach the women. Particularly in Africa, this is true. I don't have time to say more about this, but that's a desperately needed thing for a couple or couples to go, support each other, go together, and go to those places. I'll give you the contacts. Go to those places. Preach the gospel, teach the women, teach the children, teach the men, and it's a life-changing experience. When I came home from Nigeria the first time, and I kept a running record of, in detail, a diary of every day that I was there. It's the only time I ever did that. And I was so supercharged, I could not get down off of it. And I was trying to read my diary to Sandy and fill in the details in between. And I was simply overwhelmed by emotion. I could not finish. It's a life-changing experience, and it's a soul-changing experience. Consider doing that kind of work. You won't be sorry you did. Dick, you ready now for the invitation? Okay. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." He didn't leave it there. He gave us the message that we're to preach. It's such a simple message. Don't make it complicated. Don't make it hard. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. He who does not believe will be condemned. That's simple. Just keep it simple. And that's what you need to do. And then go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. Baptize them once you've taught them, once you've preached, and then teach them to observe everything that the Lord has commanded. One thing I learned on my first trip to Africa, I was like other American preachers, I had the habit of going through long, complicated arguments to prove a point. You can't do that when you're preaching to an audience through a translator, and for that translator, English is probably his third language. The audience doesn't know English. They're reading from a translation that is in their native tongue. And you're trying to and they may be semi-educated. And you can't do that. And I learned a lesson. And I've tried to follow that lesson ever since. If I can't put my finger on the verse that plainly teaches it, just leave it alone. Make it a simple message. Preach the gospel in season and out of season. Keep it simple. Make it where everybody can understand what you're talking about, because that's the way the Lord meant it. The gospel is simple. We need to keep it that way. If you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, if you're willing to repent of your sins, if you're willing to confess with your mouth your faith in Jesus Christ, if you're willing to be baptized in water for the remission of your sins, you become a Christian tonight, and then you observe everything. You study this book, and you do everything the Lord directs you to do. And when this life is over, you'll spend eternity in heaven. We invite you to come while we stand and while we sing.